Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We're here today to talk about academic surveillance. And the term surveillance, it's currently used in a wide variety of different contexts in higher education, from obviously online proctoring to assessments and performance-based assessments to new ways of actually monitoring the student experience toward really understanding academic progress and being able to predict outcomes and even health, whether those are academic outcomes or even health outcomes, in order to optimize service levels for individual students toward personalization. So there's just a lot of promise here. But even in the name of student access and student success, these new capabilities, while interesting and while powerful, do they go too far? And what is too far? That's the focus of our conversation today. We're going to dive into this question and other questions with our esteemed panelists. Welcome to the conversation. So happy to have you here. I'm Marni Stein. I'm the Chief Academic Officer and Provost at Western Governors University. And I'm joined today by Mike Olsen, who is the founder and CEO of Proctorio. Proctorio is an online proctoring capability that proctored over 20 million exams in over 2,000 institutions during the pandemic. It's amazing. Saad Khan is the Chief Research and Innovation Officer, correct, at FineTune. And FineTune develops hybrid solutions for assessment and learning, including the first commercially available AI tool that creates test item content sort of just in time, really interesting capability. And Dr. Ashley Norris is the Chief Academic and Compliance Officer at Measure Learning. And Measure is working both in the higher education market via the ProctorU brand and the professional testing market via the Yardstick brand. So thank you for being here today. I'm going to start with a question for Ashley, but you guys can just jump in and let's just play jazz here on these questions. So Ashley, when people use the term academic surveillance, sounds kind of scary. What do they mean, and what types of capabilities are they really talking about?
Sure. So academic surveillance is, I think most of us can agree, has a negative connotation, and it's very misleading. When we specifically think about testing, students have been surveilled for years, hundreds of years. Teachers, they're proctoring in classrooms or watching students take tests. Proctors and test centers, this, and privacy has never really been addressed in that format. So, I think when we use that term academic surveillance, especially in testing, it automatically kind of misleads, everyone to think, oh, privacy, negative, invasive, which are things that have never really been a part of the conversation before. So, I know we're going to talk a little bit more about reframing and what even that term means, but, that's the way I kind of see it in the space.
You guys have any thoughts on that?
Well, I just say that it goes hand in glove with some of the concerns around academic integrity as well, because while the term might be misleading, the intent over there is actually kind of positive, to be able to actually provide more information about potential skill gaps for students, how to remediate those, and really make possible some of the things that took place during the pandemic, remote delivery of assessments that Mike can speak a lot to, as well as some of the learning that still took place without students being in the brick and mortar school experiences. So I think there are some pros and cons and to be discussed over here for sure.
Yeah, so let's start with the cons, because they're always juicy. So we've got these new capabilities that are emerging around remote proctoring, which of course during the pandemic was critical to just survival of the institution in many cases. We have Also really interesting monitoring capabilities that really track a student journey or experience either online or on campus and sort of predicts, what's going to happen if the student is using the gym 3 times a week or actually eating lunch or actually logging into the system and taking their assessments on time. We have a lot of data about students that could help to really optimize our services for those students and drive success. So these capabilities are out there. What's the problem? What's the con? They seem to be about access. They seem to be about success. What's the problem?
I'll take this one. I think, and thank you for inviting me for the panel. I think we positioned, just due to what we did last year, we proctored 20 million exams in 2020 all over the world. We're talking every religion, culture, demographic, ability, disability, race, gender. And we saw a lot of what was coming out, who was raising what points, and the reasons behind them. And I think that what we did is we accelerated this, and now we have a lot of that information. What students or learners are looking for is more information. So yes, we're promising a better education, we're promising better access, and we're going to take your data and do it. Well, what data are you taking? Where is it going? How long is it going to be stored? Who has access to it? Those are questions that I think, unfortunately, during the pandemic, we're not asked. We're used to normal procurement periods being about 9 months. In April of last year, it was 9 days. Universities were signing contracts left and right, trying to procure software, and not asking the right questions. I think in our small industry, there's maybe 5 legitimate companies that do it, and 2 of those were hacked during the pandemic, and student information was leaked. And universities need to ask those questions. They need to run a process. They need to understand where the data is going, because the students are going to ask, and they should ask. They should know where it's going, how long it's being stored, and what's being processed on it. And I think that's what was missing. And now we have a lot of those answers. Companies like ours, we've released a policy center, which uses normal English words, not 15, 16 character lawyer-written terms of services. And I think that this was a great opportunity for companies like ours, universities like yours, to take that action, start really investigating the vendors, and then providing more transparency. And with that, you're going to address a lot of the issues that came out.
I think that's an excellent sequence of points over there, Mike, that you make. I believe as with any groundbreaking technology, there's always a potential of it actually being misused. And that is very much the possibility with academic surveillance and the capture of student data, particularly in scenarios where the right checks and balances are not put into place. I'm a big fan of the European Union's GDPR rules. We might need something like that in the US as well. Now, that being said, let's put that into the context of what the rest of the world, what the scenario is. The fact is, as I think, Ashley, you were pointing out, surveillance is not a new concept, right? Unlike with people, which is hard to actually probe into, and many people are actually even unaware of their own subjective biases. With machines and with data, it's actually possible now to put into place best practices to go back and analyze the data and fix those problems and perhaps remediate some of the concerns in the future.
Right, and I'll add to that, not only kind of what Mike was talking about with full transparency to the test taker and to all the stakeholders, faculty and everyone in the system about how you store data, how you access it, FAQs, town halls with students because they have questions, why is this happening during the process, and really making sure they're educated and they see what's going to happen. Typically, I'll speak directly to remote proctoring. Before a student has the experience, they don't know what to expect, just like anything else, unless you've taken a test, remote proctored, what their technology is going to do, what the actual experience. So, educating them, practice test. There's all these methodologies, right, to ensure they feel comfortable in the experience and know exactly what's going to happen. In addition to that, one of the interesting things that we found, especially during the pandemic, is that, to Saad's point, our technology, for instance, we also had a product in which faculty were the reviewers, or they received information. And we realized, that as a point of validation, we're kind of the experts in, proctoring and human validation of our product. So we, created kind of this human first narrative messaging, and really focused on that, this is what our product needs to be. We took that product actually, out of our offerings, because we realized that this combination of utilizing AI and technology with validation by a human was really where we wanted to be in the space. So, that was just a decision, and, something we made that in thinking through this whole paradigm.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to add, because I think, Marni, you talked about, it's important to highlight potential, cons over here. And I'm a computer scientist. I work on developing machine learning solutions with the kind of data that we now have access to. And there is the concern that there might be biases that are in these machine learning solutions that we deploy at scale. So I was earlier saying how people can do damage, but certainly if the right processes or best practices are not followed with the delivery of machine learning solutions at scale, the damage potentially could be amplified. But then simply blaming the data, I don't think is very satisfying, because it's almost saying you're blaming the last link in the chain when you're really missing out the larger picture of what's wrong with the system. If the data was flawed, it was biased. You deploy a machine learning solution for, say, face recognition, and you realize that there are biases in the solution when it comes to based on the color of the skin. Well, the data set is biased, but then you got to ask the question, why is the data set biased in the first place? How was it captured? Were there biases in the way the data was captured? When it was labeled to train machine learning solutions, were the labelings actually reflecting biases that people might be projecting? If the biases are there, why were they not captured in a QA process before delivery of the solution? So this speaks to problems which are not really data problems. These are cultural, organizational problems. I think diversity in teams can organically help with that, but we're certainly at a time now that best practices ought to be put into place to address those issues.
Yeah, and that was my next question, which is really one of the biggest concerns, is that there are these implicit, or even in some cases expliciit, biases that really impact low-income students and students of color that are surfacing through these technologies, but yet we know that those exact same biases exist in the system, right? Forget the technology. They're there to begin with, and now they're surfacing through these technologies as well. Like, one of the things you talked about is, diversifying your teams. What are some of the other best practices that you all are looking into to understand how to rail against this and continuously improve in ways that really drive for equity?
Well, I think, especially with AI and models, the good news there is, although the biases can be amplified, they can also be controlled. They can also be measured. It's pretty hard when you're hiring a faculty to say, hey, are you a racist? I gotta know, right? But an algorithm, you can provide the right data, test it, and you can actually make that assessment. So I think that's the good news. The bad news is organizations are not doing that. They're not testing it. They're not being transparent about those tests that are being done, and that's a big problem. The promise, unfortunately, with these technologies is we're trying to serve that group that's typically actually discriminated against with these biases. And we need to fix that. We need to put these processes in place. And I think it starts with the universities. Again, back to my original point, during procurement, ask for that, right? Ask for that. Ask for the audits. Ask for the data. Ask for the analysis. Because you should have that. Because you know what? If you don't ask then, students are going to ask later, and you're not going to have an answer. And that's not a good place to be.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So, okay, so we've sort of taken a dive into the cons. What's the promise here? Like when you're thinking out 1 year, 2 years, 5 years into the future, I know COVID has been a huge accelerator in this space. What is the promise of these capabilities in terms of really leveling the playing field for students and driving, exponential gains in success across learner populations?
Access. I think a lot of us, I used to work in a university, a lot of us were used to that brick and mortar system. The university I used to work for builds buildings all the time. I don't think they're ever going to stop. And, that is restrictive. That's restrictive to access. People can't make it there. Primarily, so pre-COVID, our company, we serviced people who couldn't make it to campus. It wasn't, rich kids who were taking online classes or something like that. It was people who couldn't get to campus, right? They have a full-time job, they have kids, they sign on at 2 a.m., take their exams, hopefully get some studying in, and then go to bed, right? So I think that the promise here is access, and the pandemic forced this movement to really kick off. And I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, we can't wait, we're gonna go back to the classroom next week. I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. You have 2 years of students who weren't doing that. And then, by the way, the incoming class, they just took 2 years of high school online. They're not going to do it either. So I think what we're seeing is that promise to access. And I hope the technologies can drive that, whether it's surveillance or not. I think there is promise there.
Really hoping my kindergartner can go back to school this fall. I was in a panel the other day, and one of the panelists made this very interesting, very simple observation, and he said that in a matter of 15 to 20 years, we've gone from a point where almost all delivery of learning content was in the form of pages and books and paper and what have you, to a point where you never had an ability to understand what were the parts of the content that the students are finding most efficacious, interesting, and learning from that. To a point now you can actually track the bits and pieces at the time, which page is being viewed for how long, how it's being shared, and so on and so forth, to capture that kind of data and make the most efficacious recommendations of content and make better diagnostics of skill gaps too. So that's just a beautiful little story over there of the progression that's taken place, and not to mention that also coming in, to help us during the pandemic. But looking forward, I think there's tremendous potential with the appropriate checks and balances in place and the best practices that Mike Hugh and Ashley spoke about, to use that kind of data for good. Like, for example, adaptive learning. It's been this very seductive notion for a long time. It's just not been possible until I think some of the breakthroughs in technology that are happening right now. Access you spoke to. I believe automated tutoring is another leveling event, right? So we know all about Bloom's work around the 2 sigma effect. If you had the right personalized instruction available to you, you can have a 2 sigma improvement in learning outcomes. It's just not scalable, through the course of human history, because it requires, you got to be wealthy to be able to afford a tutor. But can we get 50% of the way there with AI and some of the access to the data that we can actually get? So those are just a few examples.
I'd just like to jump. Oh, sorry. Go right ahead. Go right ahead.
So I wanted to add to kind of on both those points that when we talk about access, we talk a lot about accessing, especially for, adult learners, populations globally. But another interesting thing that, especially during the pandemic, is that, students that are differently abled, that have accommodations. I mean, this really became a focus, and we've always, in a classroom, in an environment, these students just naturally are excluded, right? They're testing in a different space, even if it's double time. They're using an assistive technology, so they have to test outside, or even, maybe for project-based learning, there's special accommodations given, and they're excluded. And so one thing that has been really interesting to watch is that in, a digital world and utilizing these technologies, these students can feel included, and they can be in the comfort of their own home. They can, not only from an equity standpoint of just having an equitable experience that they feel as their students, that their personal journey as a student becomes something that they feel much more comfortable with, right? So, I mean, my background's in psychology, and obviously very, very passionate. We all love what we do, right? We wouldn't be up here really advocating for these technologies if we didn't. But, that's always just a really key piece. And another, when we were talking about equity, which is kind of the other category, I know I could talk about pros probably for, 30 minutes. But, one interesting thing, one of our partners that we work with, and they do emissions-based type testing, and they saw a significant increase in populations, certain ethnicities, certain socioeconomic groups that basically they had seen a big drop off. And it's because you think of someone's experience, they have to take a full day off work, to go to a testing center, potentially even maybe spend the night at a hotel. And now, utilizing these technologies, they're able to test and able to kind of advance their lives and their careers. So it's a really, when we think about these digital technologies, yes, transparency and, but there's such a benefit, and it puts a big responsibility on us as well, right?
Yeah,
being in this space.
I'd just like to dive into this this aspect of what we're talking about a little bit deeper. So a lot of what you're talking about requires pretty sophisticated underlying assessment design and strategy, right? In order to understand adaptive, transformative learning pathways to mastery and effectively assess those, that's not test writing 101, right? That is very sophisticated, psychometrically sound design of performance-based assessments across multiple sort of levels of mastery and skill. That's not something most universities were designed to do. I mean, we have individual faculty members who are accountable for writing the exams or the project specs for their class and then assessing that work. Where do you think this intersection of these new technologies and capabilities and just assessment and assessment design in K through 12 and universities is going into the future? Because certainly there's a forcing function here, I think, on the whole practice of assessment in higher education that's implied by everything you're talking about.
Well, I think these products, I think they can help bridge the gap. Not that universities need it. I've always found it interesting. Universities are actually competitors and they share info all the time. But when you do have these sort of products that are collecting data across multiple demographics, students in other countries, things like that, you are going to get that sort of aggregate data, and that's going to allow you to build these kinds of things out. So I think products in this space can help bridge that, can help connect universities, connect different demographics and things like that. I think that's going to help lead the way.
One interesting thing that has been enabled by the access to data and advances in machine learning is that you can complement some of the top-down, theory-driven, psychometrically sound approaches with bottom-up, data-driven insights as well. That's what we're seeing, that there are ways to actually accumulate data over time across vast cohorts of learners and draw from it insights that are actually informative around how to design instruction, how to deliver it in the most targeted fashion to remediate skill gaps. So I think that's one of the really interesting things as a potential that's come out of almost this overlap between psychometrics and data science.
Well, and it was lost before, right? You had a really good faculty, a really good group, or good program, and it was lost. It was left there. Those lucky students who were fortunate to go through that, got it, but no one else did. So I think that's one of the promises.
You mean the data and the learnings were lost?
The data, the learning, and how to use that and build that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. No, I mean, Marni, I think you really bring up a great point on the landscape of education in general, right? Funding for educating faculty, teachers, this is K-12 and in the higher ed space, they just had to, turn on technologies without really any education, knowledge, or experience. And for a lot of individuals and faculty and administrators that have worked in online higher education, they have the skills. They're even innovating ways to do assessments through student journeys. But I mean, that's a huge gap. It's a huge gap of knowledge, of just approach, curriculum instruction to assessment. So I think everyone knows the future is hybrid modalities, is something like that. This is kind of a funny story, but I was just speaking with students at one of our universities, and I said, so, what do you guys, what do you think about hybrid or going back in the classroom? Aren't you excited to go back on campus? Because there was they were all going back on campus fall. This was about a couple of weeks ago. And they said, we really wish we could just go like the first week of class and meet all our friends and then have online modality the rest of the semester. And I thought that's interesting, but because it's, they actually did enjoy this, I guess the capability of watching, when they want the lecture, having these small group tutorials, having a more personalized learning experience. But, I do think there is a gap between where a lot of universities are and, across this space of making that digital transformation happen.
Yeah, and this assessment piece of it is a really critical piece of that gap. So in my own personal anecdote about this is, I went to a large state university as an undergrad that shall not be named, but everybody knew that there were documented copies of assessments across especially every BDR course in the first 2 years that could be purchased. They could be located and purchased if you had enough ambition to do it. This has been going on for years. Obviously, when we're talking about these high impact scale digital assessments, there is a concern that those assessments are going to get out there and that students are going to be able to find them and cheat. And especially when an assessment for an institution is expensive to build in the first place. It's expensive to develop in the first place. Like, how are we going to attend to this in the future? Because there's so much promise in remote access to assessment, and there's so much promise around assessment design as like this incredible, powerful part of the learning experience, right? But yet there are all these concerns around academic integrity of the assessment and the items themselves, especially in the digital format and scale. How are we going to attend to these concerns?
Well, I'm sure Mike can speak a lot to one way of addressing that, which is to recreate the guardrails that in-person proctoring brings into place. I think there are additional tools that we can bring to bear over here. You mentioned, for example, item pool exposure. Of course, it speaks to people being able to go online on Chegg or Quizlet or what have you, get the answers. It's unfair to the students who want to do the right thing, right? So perhaps one solution is to address the bottleneck on the creation of high-quality assessment content in the first place. Now, if there was a way that you could deliver to every individual student on-the-fly, bespoke, customized, composed assessment content just for them, once and done, then you take away some of the motivation to go online and search for the answer for the same question, because that question or that item did not exist until that moment it was delivered to that individual. So I think there are interesting new ways that are now just coming to fore as a possibility to really come up with this more holistic approach to addressing concerns around academic integrity while giving individual students, the parents, the flexibility that I think we've come to accept as something that probably is going to stick with us for a long time to go.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that is missing, and this goes back to the original question you asked me, is the universities are never answering the question why. I can play devil's advocate here and say, well, you know what? I can just Google it when I go get a job, and that's the same thing, right? So I think that there's a missing component there of why. And I don't think the university is doing a good good enough job to explain that, because why? I can Google it. Why are you doing this? Why are you making this more difficult for me? Why is this a problem? And that is going to get us in a better place when we can answer that. We can give them the reason that these things matter and why we care. And we're not just a several hundred-year-old university who just does things the way we did it just because we did it that way. I think then we're going to start building trust and relationships, and that's what's going to move this forward.
So like the value and relevancy of the assessment in terms of the student understanding the value of the experience itself, not just gaming it.
Not just gaming it, yeah. And look, there's extreme examples, sure. When you go get a surgery and the surgeon's like, hang on, let me Google this real quick before I do it, obviously that's a concern. If you've got a student who says like, well, I can't figure out derivatives, I can just Google it or use that Chegg solver thing. Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. Like, well, why? If they can do that in their job, why does it matter at the university?
Yeah, and students will typically, when we look at a lot of data about kind of students' behaviors, and if they are cheating through accounting 101, I mean that sets them up for personal and academic failure down the road, right? So I see it. I mean, you're right, Mike. There are so many professions where you're like, wow, I sure hope the person operating or caring for me or even sticking an IV, has the skills and knowledge to do that, right? But also, to Saad's point, you have inequities of students who want to learn, and then they start to even find themselves, well, it's not fair that, I know you wouldn't really look up a test, Saad, but that he did it, and I'm at a disadvantage now because I'm not utilizing, materials and things like that. But then there's also a lot of personal failure from these types of behaviors, outside of what we do.
And there are actually other ways, right? So more cultural ways that we can maybe lessen the need or the pressure to cheat sometimes. Acceptance for failure. Mm-hmm. Summative exams resulting, okay, if I fail over here, my entire trajectory is going to be derailed. So those kind of things, I think, are a bit more cultural that we have to address. Cheating's been around forever. I don't think it's going to go away. It's a question of how we can still continue to offer our learners the conveniences that technology can afford, while addressing some of the concerns that actually you pointed out. Cheating harms the person who cheats the most, because they're simply not prepared for the challenges that life is going to throw at them.
On another cultural point, Saad, since I have you here trapped on stage, I'm going to ask you this question. But another cultural point is I love this idea of these just-in-time, bespoke, personalized assessments that are AI-driven and over time culturally attuned, and right. That's an amazing idea and capability, not just for online assessment, but for any assessment. Right, but what do you expect are the cultural tensions that are going to arise from that in a context of higher education, where the notion of academic freedom implies that individual faculty get to create their own assessment forms?
It's a fascinating question. While I am an AI scientist, I believe the best AI solutions that we see today are hybrid solutions. These are complementary, supplementary, supercharging human abilities. You work with Amazon Alexa or even a Tesla self-driving car. It's not a pure AI solution. It's an AI-human hybrid solution. I think what we talk about over here with the ability to create psychometrically valid assessment content is really as an AI-human hybrid solution. For example, so if you've got a professor who wants to be able to deliver on-the-fly quiz or end-of-chapter exercises, and they are kind of handicapped by the fact that there are these 5 items at the end of the chapter, you can Google them and you'll find them on Chegg, right? Would there be a way to come up with 100 versions of those, which are unique and novel, but still speaking to the construct, that as a professor you can say, okay, swipe right, swipe left over here, and in a matter of minutes you're able to actually reproduce high quality assessment content which was otherwise not possible. I don't think it's a pure, I'm not talking in absolutes. So the function that needs to be optimized over here is what degree of human involvement makes sense, informative, summative, and so forth.
Yeah, it's almost like, as a faculty member, my personal AI assistant.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and I think, I know just from my own teaching experience, and certainly even in the scale work we do at WGU, that would be a very powerful assistant to have, because many of us have not been trained to write those assessments and really struggle with it over time. Yeah, okay, so just back to the topic at hand. We have this term academic surveillance. It has a slightly negative connotation. It seems to me an unproductive sort of polarizing frame. You're either for it or you're against it. So just from your perspective, and you've got great perspective, what's a better frame for thinking about these capabilities in the future and having constructive conversations around them?
Well, I think it goes to what really is surveillance. I think surveillance, it's what Facebook does, right? I don't think WGU is doing that, right? You guys are looking for students who aren't participating in class and maybe sending them a push notification saying, hey, anything we can do to help. Very different from what Facebook does. So I think defining that, but the piece that's missing is those transparencies again. When we talk about surveillance, the reason it's considered surveillance is no one knows what's going on. All right, it's a black box to these individuals. Data's coming in, something's coming out. We don't know what it's doing. We don't know who the vendors are selling it to, right? So we talk about this predictive text analysis and stuff like that. Well, where did that data come from? Was it a bunch of students? And how is some company now using that to make money? That's an element of surveillance that I think we need to address and we need to talk about. And that'll get us away from this sort of connotation that it's called surveillance. Instead it's tools to help access, to help students do better, and improve education.
Yeah.
I think data awareness is going to go a long way if the students understand, give consent, and take ownership of that data. And by the way, education is far from the only industry which is being, perhaps we're far behind what you see in, like Facebook. You mentioned Facebook or Google. They probably know a lot more about me than even I do. So I think we have an opportunity to do it right in education because we're really just starting out. So if we provide clear instructions and help students really get ownership of their own data, they might see the benefit of actually using it for their own good.
Yes, I agree with that absolutely. And I think, Mike spoke about at the very beginning how, during the pandemic, a lot of students were just kind of forced to, especially with online proctoring, you're taking your test this way with no knowledge, no education. And this term started swirling around pretty much around that time of somebody's watching me physically through a camera. That's weird, and all the privacy questions surrounding it. So a lot of it, digital literacy, education, knowledge, and I think really, students are the digital education is not going away. It's only going to become more and more a part of their lives throughout their careers, through certifications. They're always going to be interacting, right, in some capacity for learning and digital learning. So really just educating, being very transparent about this is what the data is used for. It's our opportunity to have best practices and to be transparent in that space, and then also get their feedback. What did they want? It's a two-way source of information, right? This is information about you. Marni, to your point, a lot of that personalized learning, students go, oh, wow, I am really, I need some critical skills in X. And if they learn that early in their career, or in their academic journey, that becomes something really powerful for them. Just like they may say, oh, wow, I have I'm doing really well in this certain skill or capacity. Maybe I should consider this for a career for, the rest of my life. So, it's very powerful what these tools can do together. But, I think we need to make it a two-way street where they enjoy it, want to use it.
Yeah, Absolutely. And I think you guys have pointed out on many occasions during this conversation, it really is a two-way street. And these new companies presenting these new powerful capabilities are really, I think, doing us all a great favor in terms of the toolkit for access and success into the future. But we do need to work together to figure this out because it's obviously incredibly complicated. And I really congratulate you guys all and thank you for all the good work you're doing on this front.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.